I had always been a city person, accustomed to the cacophony of car horns, flashing neon lights, and the comforting hum of street chatter. But that weekend camping trip with my friends, well, that's what changed it all. It wasn't your typical ghost story or a monster lurking in the shadows. No, it was the sheer isolation and disorientation of being lost in the woods that had me teetering on the edge of panic. We had set off on what we thought would be a leisurely hike in the woods, a break from the usual urban grind. The forest was dense, and as we ventured further in, the trees seemed to close in around us, obscuring the sunlight. The crisp, earthy scent of the woods enveloped us, and the rustling of leaves beneath our boots filled the air. It felt like a serene escape at first. As the day wore on, we walked deeper into the forest, following a trail that was supposed to lead us back to our campsite. Or so we thought. We must have taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way, but it's easy to lose your bearings in a place like that. The trees all look the same, towering over you like sentinels, and it's easy to forget which way you came from. I remember joking with my friends about our newfound survival skills, pretending to be rugged explorers forging our path through the wilderness. But deep down, a sense of unease was gnawing at me, and I could tell the others were feeling it too. The forest had a way of making your own footsteps echo with doubt. As the day turned into night, we decided to make camp and wait until morning. I tried to convince myself that this was just a minor setback, that we'd find our way back easily in the morning. We gathered some firewood and set up a small campfire, but that's when things took a darker turn. As the fire crackled and cast eerie, dancing shadows, we began to hear strange noises emanating from the woods. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and faint whispers that sent a shiver down my spine. I had told myself it was just our overactive imaginations playing tricks on us, but the unease lingered. We heard footsteps, soft but deliberate, approaching our camp. Panic set in, and we huddled together, clutching our makeshift weapons, a couple of branches as if that would protect us from whatever was out there. The steps grew louder, and suddenly we saw it. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form indistinct but unmistakably human. "Who's there?" one of my friends shouted, his voice trembling. No response, just the figure drawing closer. Fear washed over us, and I remember thinking that this was it, the moment we'd all been dreading. But then, the figure stepped into the firelight, and we all let out a collective gasp. It was a man, disheveled and wild-eyed, his clothes torn and filthy. He didn't look threatening, he looked terrified. He was muttering to himself, something about never finding a way out. He didn't seem to notice us at all. It was as if he was trapped in his own world of fear. We cautiously approached him, offering him food and water, which he took without a word. He seemed dazed, lost in the labyrinth of the forest. We tried to get information out of him, but he just mumbled incomprehensibly. It was clear he'd been out here for days, maybe even weeks. We decided to let him stay with us for the night, not just for his safety, but also because we were equally afraid of being alone in this unfamiliar, foreboding place. We sat around the campfire, exchanging worried glances and sharing whispered speculations about what had happened to this man. As the fire dwindled, he finally spoke more coherently. "I was out here with my friends," he said, his voice quivering. "We got lost, just like you. And then, they disappeared one by one. Something took them." My heart sank as I looked at my friends, our eyes reflecting the same dread. It was a story straight out of a horror movie. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man told us that he had managed to escape whatever was hunting them, but he couldn't find his way back out of the woods. We huddled together, deciding to stick together, with the hope that safety would come in numbers, but the forest had other plans. The night wore on, and the strange noises continued. The man grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that whatever had taken his friends was now stalking us. Then, in the darkest hours of the night, as we sat shivering around the dying embers of our fire, the man abruptly stood up and bolted into the woods. We called out to him, but he didn't respond. He vanished into the darkness, leaving us alone once more. We were now utterly petrified, more lost than ever, and facing an unknown menace in the woods. The first rays of dawn revealed the grim reality. We were deep in the heart of the forest, with no trail, no sense of direction, and no way out. We had no choice but to stick together and continue searching for a way home. Our situation was dire, but we couldn't let fear paralyze us. We trudged through the underbrush, navigating the same dense trees that had led us astray in the first place. Hours turned into days, and our hope waned with each passing moment. Our supplies dwindled, and our energy was nearly depleted. And then, just when it felt like we were on the verge of giving up, we stumbled upon a clearing in the woods. At the center of this clearing, we found an old, weather-beaten cabin. It stood there, silent and eerie, like something out of a nightmare. We exchanged nervous glances, but decided that shelter was our only option. We cautiously approached the cabin and pushed open the creaking door. Inside, we found a scene that sent shivers down our spines. The cabin was adorned with faded photographs and drawings of people who had disappeared in the woods. The walls were covered with scrawled messages, all of them pleading for help and recounting tales of terror. It was a chilling archive of those who had come before us, all lost to the same malevolent force. We knew we couldn't stay there, but before we could make our escape, we heard the footsteps approaching. The cabin's door swung open with a deafening creak, and a haunting figure emerged from the darkness. It was the man we had encountered before, but he was no longer the terrified, lost soul we had once known. His eyes gleamed with a sinister madness, and he grinned wickedly. "They found you," he hissed, as a shadowy horde of figures closed in behind him. The cabin had become a trap, and we were cornered. In that moment, I knew that escape was futile. We were the latest victims of the woods, and there was no way out. As the horde descended upon us, I couldn't help but wonder if we would end up as yet another entry on those chilling walls, a reminder of those who had ventured into the woods and never returned. Getting lost in the woods is never part of the plan. It was supposed to be a simple weekend camping trip with my buddy Mike. We wanted to escape the city for a while, trade the blaring sirens and honking horns for the calming sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds. But as it often happens in life, things don't go according to plan. We started out early on a sunny Friday morning, packed with tents, sleeping bags, and a small cooler filled with sandwiches and drinks. The forest was beautiful, serene, and the air was clean and crisp. We followed a well-marked trail, chatting, laughing, and feeling like true adventurers. As the day wore on, though, we ventured off the beaten path, curious to explore deeper into the woods. A little excitement couldn't hurt, right? But what we thought was a small detour turned into something more daunting. The dense trees began to close in around us, swallowing up the sunlight, and the trail markers vanished. Panic slowly seeped in. Hours passed, and it felt like we were walking in circles. The trees all looked the same, the underbrush unrelenting. Our compass was no help, either. It spun like a kid's toy, providing no clear direction. Frustration gnawed at us, and I could see the unease in Mike's eyes. I could feel my own fear growing with each step. It wasn't long before we realized that we were not alone out here. We could hear something moving in the underbrush, a rustling and shuffling that sent chills down my spine. It was getting closer, and my heart pounded in my chest. We exchanged nervous glances and tightened our grip on the hiking poles we'd been using. Suddenly, a group of wild boars burst through the underbrush, snorting and grunting. They were massive, their tusks gleaming menacingly in the dappled sunlight. Panic overtook us, and we scrambled up a nearby tree, praying they wouldn't reach us. The boars snuffled around for a while and then retreated into the forest. We didn't dare to descend from our refuge for hours, fearing that they might return. When we finally felt safe enough to climb down, it was already late afternoon. The sun cast long, eerie shadows as it dipped below the trees, and the forest grew darker. We needed to find shelter for the night. The woods seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. We picked a direction and walked, hoping to find a clearing, a cabin, anything that could serve as a shelter. Nightfall came, and we huddled together, fighting the creeping cold and fear. My thoughts were racing as we tried to light a fire with soaked wood, and I couldn't help but wonder how we'd ended up in this mess. The sounds of the forest at night were both beautiful and unsettling. A chorus of frogs sang their songs, while owls hooted in the distance. But beneath it all, there was an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. It was as if the woods held its breath, waiting for something. The night passed slowly, and our makeshift fire provided little comfort. We heard more rustlings, not far from our camp, and my heart pounded. Were the boars back, or something worse? I caught a glimpse of glowing eyes in the darkness, reflecting the dim light of our fire. Panic surged through me, but we stood our ground this time, realizing that running might lead us deeper into danger. Slowly, the figure approached, and as it stepped into the firelight, we let out a collective sigh of relief. It was a man, older and weathered, with a long beard and ragged clothes. He looked disoriented and relieved to see us. He muttered something about being lost for days. We offered him food and water, and he gratefully accepted, sitting by our fire. He explained that he'd been camping with his friends, just like us, and they too had gotten lost. Then a shiver ran down my spine as he whispered, and then they were taken. Something in these woods, something evil. My thoughts raced. Could this be some sort of folklore, the ramblings of a madman? But the fear in his eyes seemed genuine, and my unease grew. He spoke of bizarre, shadowy creatures lurking in the forest, snatching his friends away one by one. It was a tale straight out of a horror story, and my mind refused to accept it. This couldn't be real. Yet, as the night deepened, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in these woods, that something was watching us, waiting for the right moment. We decided to stay close to the stranger, figuring there was safety in numbers. The next morning, we set out with a new sense of purpose, determined to find our way back. The wood seemed less oppressive in the daylight, and the man led us in a direction that felt hopeful. We followed a stream, hoping it would lead us to civilization. Just as it seemed we might have a chance, we heard a chilling howl in the distance. The man's face turned ashen, and he urged us to hide. Moments later, a pack of wolves emerged from the underbrush, their eyes locked on us. We froze, not daring to make a sound. The leader of the pack stepped forward, a massive, imposing creature. I could feel my heart in my throat as it approached. And then, just as it seemed our lives were at their end, the man threw himself between us and the wolves. He bellowed, and his sheer ferocity startled the wolves, giving us enough time to escape. We ran, our hearts pounding, never looking back. The man had sacrificed himself to save us. It was a sobering moment that made me realize the gravity of our situation. The forest was not just a place of natural beauty. It was a place of danger, of mysteries and horrors that I couldn't fathom. As we continued our journey, it seemed as if the woods were taunting us. Every turn led to another dead end, another dense thicket. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring to keep us lost, to make us part of its dark secrets. It wasn't until a week later that we finally stumbled upon a ranger's outpost, disheveled, exhausted, and changed in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. We told our story to the rangers, who listened with skepticism. They searched for the man who had saved us, but found no trace of him. I often find myself thinking back to that day, wondering about the man who had risked his life to save us. Was he a figment of our imagination, a madman lost in the woods, or something more sinister? The forest had shown us its true face, and it was one of uncertainty, of fear, and of the unknown. The wilderness can be a beautiful escape, but it can also be a nightmare, one that swallows you whole, leaving only whispers of your existence behind. So, if you ever find yourself wandering in the woods, remember that it's not just nature you're up against, it's the untamed, unforgiving soul of the wild. Have you ever been so lost that it felt like your mind was a tangled mess of uncertainty and confusion? Well, I have, and let me tell you about it. It was a warm summer day when my friends and I decided to go hiking in the woods. We were all experienced hikers, and the trail we chose seemed like a piece of cake. It was supposed to be an enjoyable adventure, an escape from our busy lives. But as you'll soon find out, the woods can turn into a maze of nightmares when you least expect it. We set off early, excited and full of energy. The forest was a lush, green paradise, with sunlight streaming through the leaves and casting intricate shadows on the ground. Birds chirped their sweet melodies, and the air was filled with the earthy scent of the woods. The trail was well marked, and our laughter echoed through the trees. As the day wore on, we decided to explore a side trail. The urge to discover something new overcame us, and we thought we could easily find our way back. But you know how it goes. One moment of curiosity can lead to a whole lot of trouble. Our initial excitement turned into unease as the trail became less defined, and the markers seemed to disappear. The forest around us grew thicker, the trees towering overhead and blocking out the sun. Shadows danced on the ground, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Hours passed, and we found ourselves going in circles. The woods had that uncanny way of playing tricks on you, making you second-guess every step you take. My heart raced, and I exchanged worried glances with my friends. Panic started to claw at my chest, and I couldn't help but wonder if we'd ever find our way back. The silence was deafening, and I felt a growing sense of isolation, as though the forest was closing in on us, swallowing us whole. The deeper we ventured, the denser the trees became. We were well and truly lost, with no trail to follow, and I could see the fear mirrored in my friend's eyes. And that's when it happened. We heard a guttural growl, low and menacing. We froze in our tracks. A group of wolves emerged from the underbrush, their eyes locked onto us. My heart pounded, and I clutched my hiking poles, praying they wouldn't attack. The pack surrounded us, and the alpha wolf stepped forward, its yellow eyes boring into my soul. I could feel the tension in the air, the silent negotiation between predator and prey. We were helpless, outnumbered, and our only defense was our hiking poles. In that moment, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the end of our journey. But the wolves, after what felt like an eternity, broke their gaze and retreated into the forest. We were left standing there, shaken but alive. It was as if they had allowed us to live. We took it as a sign to move on, even though we had no idea which way to go. Nightfall descended, and our situation became even more dire. We needed shelter, and we needed it fast. The forest transformed into an eerie, mysterious place in the dark. We managed to light a small fire, and its feeble light cast long dancing shadows that seemed to taunt us. As the night wore on, the woods came alive with strange sounds. We heard rustling in the underbrush, whispers in the wind, and the distant cries of creatures unknown. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the darkness, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to pounce. My thoughts raced, and I couldn't help but wonder how we'd ended up in this nightmare. The forest, once a place of serene beauty, had turned into a place of terror and uncertainty. We huddled together, our senses on high alert, and hoped that dawn would bring some clarity. But when morning finally arrived, It was just another cruel twist in our ordeal. The forest looked completely unfamiliar, and we were more lost than ever. Panic bubbled up inside me, and I could see the same fear reflected in my friend's eyes. We continued to walk, our bodies weary and our minds racing. I felt a creeping sense of dread, like an unseen hand was closing in around my throat. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring to keep us trapped within its depths. And that's when things took a surreal turn. I began to see things that couldn't possibly be real. Shadows morphed into sinister shapes, and the trees seemed to leer at me with twisted, gnarled branches. The world around me shifted and twisted, and I couldn't trust my own eyes. It was as if the forest was a reflection of my mind, a labyrinth of confusion and fear. I couldn't tell if the horrors I saw were real or mere hallucinations. My friends, equally affected, were trapped in this waking nightmare with me. As hours turned into days, we became increasingly disoriented. We stumbled upon a clearing, but it was unlike any clearing I'd ever seen. The grass was a sickly shade of grey, and the trees that surrounded it were dead, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. In the center of the clearing stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows shattered and its walls covered in strange symbols. We approached the cabin cautiously, our hearts pounding. We needed shelter, and this was our only option. But as we stepped inside, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The interior was just as eerie as the outside, with tattered curtains swaying in the wind and a foul, musty smell that clung to the air. The cabin seemed abandoned, yet it felt as if it held the echoes of all those who had been trapped within these woods. The walls were covered in desperate messages, written in a language I couldn't understand. It was as if the very essence of fear had seeped into this place, and it clung to my skin. As we searched for supplies, my friends' voices grew distant, as if they were talking to me from another world. The cabin's walls seemed to close in around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing my grip on reality. And that's when it happened. A scream, distant and blood-curdling, echoed through the cabin. I rushed outside, my heart in my throat, and I couldn't believe what I saw. My friends, my dear companions, were gone. They had vanished without a trace. Panic gripped me, and I realized that I was truly alone in this nightmarish forest. I ran, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence, but no matter which direction I chose, it felt like the forest was mocking me, leading me further into its labyrinth of horrors. I couldn't escape, and my mind, like the forest itself, was a twisted maze of confusion and fear. As I stumbled through the woods, I couldn't tell if I was hallucinating or if the forest had become a physical manifestation of my darkest fears. I was trapped, lost within myself and this nightmare of a forest, with no hope of ever finding my way out. In the end, I never did find my way back. The forest swallowed me whole, and I became just another ghostly whisper, a memory of those who had ventured into the woods and never returned. The trees closed in around me, and I was lost forever in this dark, twisted realm, a prisoner of my own mind.